Zenita, A Tale of the Yosemite 1872 by Therese Yelverton. Separator, Chapter 2, A Strange Guide. Now, said Kenmure, lest you should think I have brought you to this wilderness to make you be food for ghouls and water kelpies, I will point out the spot where you are to spend the night, and as many more as you wish. I looked round in dismay. We seem 1,000,000 miles from anywhere? Upwards, yes, he replied. But look down, and you will see a yellow spot, surrounded by what appears a few willow sticks, but which are in reality tall pines, with the river winding round like a golden cord. That is the homestead. We will go down by the trail, which is almost level, by which I found he meant a pathway, next thing to stairs, down which my horse clambered very adroitly, and thus through forests of gigantic pines, which Kenmure would climb like a cat to reach some particular cone, and point out its wonderful structure, through groves of azaleas, making the air heavy with odorous sweetness, where Kenmure would disappear altogether, returning with some precious specimen, all which he carried to me like a faithful dog, going twice the actual distance in his erratic gyrations. Then we came across a patch of great tiger lilies which we were both anxious to cull, and at last we entered on a green sward smooth as any lawn, set round, as in a garden, by mariposa lilies, so called from their resemblance to a butterfly. The piece of level ground was in front of a massive rock resembling an old country house, with gables and quaint chimneys overgrown with honeysuckle, which completed the delusion. Kenmure threw up his arms in ecstasy, and declared it was a facsimile of his father's manse in the broad old country of Perthshire. Then you are a Scotchman, I exclaimed. Yes, did you not know that by my name? Names, I said, are not so indicative in this country as in yours. There you may almost tell if a man comes of a good stock, by his name, whereas, here the greatest aristocrat might rejoice in the name of Squattles with impunity. The old country is more fastidious about euphonious sounds, and I think they are right, for I cannot help attaching a peculiar quality to peculiar sounds. What would you judge your host of this way to be? His name is Oswald Naughton. That is a name which requires a great deal of consideration. It is original. I never heard it before, and I am sure he will not be a commonplace man. Then there is poetic rhythm, which would suggest something harmonious and symmetrical in a character, both smartness and pride combined, a man from whom you might safely ask a favor, but from whom you could extort nothing. Ha, ha, laughed Kenmure, you're a fine guesser. I am not guessing in the least. You give me a real name, and I will give you the rhythmical interpretation. Then you don't believe a rose would smell as sweet if it were called a tulip. I will not discuss botany with you, but I say the rose by another name would not have played the same role in the world, would not have had the same poetical entourage. Lovers would not have offered it to their belles as emblems of their passion had it been called catnip. The twilight now had deepened to moonlight, for although we could not see any moon, she had risen, and was taking a ramble behind the cliffs, yet her light swam over the whole scenery in magic waves, transforming it to the most unearthly vision of weird enchantment. Every notch and projection caught the soft loving light which fell in perfect streams over the mighty Tuathach Nullah, which seemed to have pierced the pale clear blue of the heavens, and let out floods of its glistening moonlight. Do you not perceive the balmy odors of the pines? They also mark the height and distance of these stupendous adamantine bulwarks. What are the towers of Notre Dame, which they so singularly resemble, compared to these cathedral spires rising in proud majesty 3,000 feet, with the flying buttresses, and ancient caryatids supporting the projecting arches? Yes, I put it. I believe I see a procession of monks ascending to the great entrance of the church. Those are pine trees 200 feet high, growing up the ravine. Look at the rich carving and fretwork on the walls, and the tall minarets dazzling in the moon's rays. And I hear the muezzin calling to prayer. That is an owl, answered Kenmure, and he says, do, oh, do what? I wonder. Go on, I suggested, for we have stopped here a full quarter of an hour. and our host will have retired for the night. We will wake him up, said Kenmure, but he will not be asleep such a night as this. He has too much soul. Still, we had better move on, I said, recollecting what my former guide had turned back to say in a stage whisper. Don't let him stop, or he'll talk till Judgment Day, and don't let him stoop to pick up any new specimen, or you'll never be through with him for a month. So we moved on softly, listening to the crackle of the pine straw which covered the earth through the park-like forest. Kenmure had got one more temptation, the moonflower. Did you ever see them open to the moon? They gradually untwist the outer leaves, then suddenly burst right open like a flash of light. I have watched them many an hour. They belong to the family Oenothera. Stay, I'll hold your horse, he said, as I made a quiet attempt to keep jogging on. Now, my dear sir, I exclaimed, how long do you think it will take the flower to open? Or do you think you can inspire it with the amiable idea to do so within 60 seconds? Because longer than that I cannot wait, and I'm all on the qui-vine to see if my nomenclatology, that is what I call my new science, for it has a right to oenology, is correct as regards Mr. Naunton. The flower did not open, and we sped on again, our shadows clearly defined on the grassy meadows which were studded with flowers, whose broad discs were like stars of the first magnitude. Do you see that light? That proves they are not gone to bed, and your fears may rest. Through the trees a bright light was glimmering. Not unwelcome it appeared, for beside the excitement, which so much novelty and magnificence are sure to arouse in certain temperaments, the bodily fatigue of so many hours of uphill and downhill climbing on horseback made the prospect of rest very thoroughly congenial. What romantic temperament has not fed the soul with the marvelous and supernatural on such a night as this, when arriving either late at night or by moonlight in some unknown part of the country, he has pictured himself benighted and lost in the forest, or the fog. The night owl, or the will-o'-the-wisp, has been his only guide, and when a light has at length startled his aching sight, has imagined it the gleam of the lantern of some midnight assassins burying their dead, or fancied it proceeding from some monastery, where silence was the discipline, and where the brown-cowled monk, who attended upon us dumbly, pointed to the pallet in a bare cell as the resting place for the night, who has not frightened himself with a vague superstition, like children with a made-up bogey, the more to enjoy the pleasures of security. But this evening there was no need to conjure up any phantom of the brain, no occasion to counterfeit any romance. The reality was too importunately present. Here was I, a lone woman having transgressed her husband's directions to await him in a civilized place, alone in the wildest part of the wild world, with a stranger, the like of whom I had never met in all my travels, wandering on an untrodden path to a habitation of which I knew next to nothing. It was certainly as extraordinary and romantic a situation as any lover of fiction could have framed, but my ruminations were cut short by our actual arrival, and a wild halloo from Kenmure to arouse the inmates. Zenita, A Tale of the Yosemite 1872, by Therese Yelverton. Separator, Chapter 3, The Daughters of Awane, a more charming adobe. Never gladden the eyes of the weary traveler than that which rose before me as I saw it in the moonlight, an Italian cottage, with wide and tasteful veranda, over which grapevine and wisteria were contending for each morsel of trellis work. It was constructed of the rich yellow cedar, each knot-end contortion of grain showing out like lumps of burnished gold. The pointed gabled roof was shaded by an enormous oak, with trunks some 12 feet in diameter, whose broad leaves lay on the yellow shingles like seaweed on a sandy beach. In a semicircle grew tall pines, the Douglas fir, and cedars, the lower spaces filled in with maples, and occasionally a Quercus virens, a small plot of garden, with choice flowers clustered around the veranda. And beyond, the river wound in serpentine curves green and clear, silvered here and there by the moonlight, and reflecting the summits of the great mountains. Such a fairy-like sight I had never even read of in my youthful story hooks. And how did it get here? I exclaimed. That beautiful bijou cottage amid these fierce and ragged rocks. Was it borne through the air from Italy or Switzerland, on the wings of seraphs, like the Casa Santa di Loreto? You've got to see my sawmill, and then you will know how it all came about. For goodness sake, quoth I, don't destroy my poetic hallucination by suggestions of a sawmill. Kenmure laughed one of his joyous, ringing laughs, and mine host appeared at the door. Little introduction seemed necessary. He had me off my horse in the twinkling of an eye, seated in one of the easiest chairs I know of, and I am a connoisseur in those articles, with a pinkish-colored California wine sparkling in an antique glass before me, and here I was in 2 minutes as cozy and comfortable as though I had called a queen my cousin. Mr. Naughton was a tall, spare man of 50, but looking 10 years older, from his long snowy beard and the few white locks, which still adorned his fine phrenologically developed head. His brilliant dark eyes shone with charity and humor. There was a benignant sweetness about his whole demeanor that made you feel at once that he would become the best friend you ever had. And I longed to impart to Mr. Kenmore the correctness of my divination. He wore no coat or vest, and his trousers, which were very loose, had the same tendency as Mr. Kenmure's, requiring to be hitched up, which I subsequently found was an epidemic in the valley among the nether garments. Upon his shoulder he carried, as a part and parcel of his natural appendage, a lovely child about 2 or 3 years old, who poised herself on her elevated station with one little dimpled hand on the top of the bald head. She was a fair, blue-eyed, flaxen-haired little creature, the living picture of one of Raphael's angels, cheeks like 2 luscious ripe peaches, and rounded limbs dimpled all over. Before my eyes could satiate themselves with this lovely vision, I was interrupted by a sharp little nip on my arm, and turning, beheld the most midnight prototype of face I have ever seen in a human being, much less a child of 6 years. It had all the character of the portraits of Mrs. Siddons taken as Lady Macbeth, where she is washing out the damned spot. Her face was thin but oval, the eyes piercing black, with delicately penciled lines, squaring a Grecian brow, broad and low, with that fixed limbing which gives a stare or habitual frown to the face. Her complexion was the richest brunette hue with a pure vermilion tinge on the cheeks, which had little of the roundness of childhood. Her mouth was small, with thin, compressed lips, but her chin was of extraordinary depth and power. The hair was dark, fine, and silky. A more startling little vision, as she emerged from the shadow into the blaze of the great fire, never roused into activity a weary traveler whose sensational emotions were nearly all exhausted. The little hand with which she had pinched me to call my attention was long and slender, the fingers so tapered that it looked like the hand of some little hobgoblin. "Say," she ejaculated, with another pinch, "listen. Where do you come from? Where are you going? What made you come? Do you want to camp out? I'll go with you. We had better start before the moon goes down? Have you plenty of blankets? It's only 20 miles to the top of Tisayak. I'll show you the trail. I've just come down today. Me and my sister have been camping up there some time. We killed 20 bears. You are not afraid of rattlesnakes, I suppose. There is one just below here that has bitten me 3 times, but I always cut the piece out with my jackknife, and it did me no harm. What is your name?" I asked, by way of mingling in the talk. "My name is Xanada, because I was born amongst these rocks, which are all covered with manzanita. It bears a pretty white blossom, and Mama, who is crazy for flowers, called me Xanada after then. Do you like it?" "Very much," I said. "Both the name and the idea are beautiful." "Say," she went on, "do you like me? I shall tell you tomorrow. If you are good I shall like you." "I'm not good," she answered, rapidly. "Do you want a polecat skin? I'll just go out and catch and skin one alive, and bring it to you." "No, no, thank you. Certainly not," I replied, in some horror. lest the offer might be put into execution by this wonderful little flyaway. A mischievous elfish light gleamed in her black eyes for a second. It was not a laugh, and could hardly be called a smile, for the mouth did not move, yet it was the nearest approach to either that I ever saw pass over that handsome little face. Suppose I shoot it, and keep it off, far, far away, so that you can't smell it. That will be much better, I replied. All this she snapped out in a short, rapid way, with the utmost nonchalance, as if it were the common matter of fact proceeding of every day. Her voice was wiry, and sounded more like that of an old woman's than a child. All my phrenological faculties were brought to instant play, and I was so preoccupied in my new human specimen that I did not at first notice the entrance of another personage, who seemed to glide rather than walk, and about whose every look and motion there was such a calmness and repose, that she might have represented the goddess of Placitude. She was introduced to me as Mrs. Naunton, and she uttered a few gentle words of welcome in a tone which sounded like the vibration of an Aeolian lyre. So soft and musical was her voice. She was a young woman, looking little over 20, a slight, semi-girlish, semi-matronly figure, with a Madonna cast of countenance, deep, pensive hazel eyes, a blush rose complexion, and brown hair. She moved dreamily, as if under a spell, and as she stood speaking to me, plucked meditatively the remains of a flower which she seemed to be studying botanically. She conducted me to a quaint bedroom that I found would take me all night to investigate, the scrutiny of which, therefore, I postponed until the next day. After I had taken off my things, and refreshed myself with a wash, I returned to the sitting room, still accompanied by the small sprite, who kept up a continual rattle of propositions, all of the most fabulous nature, for scaling rocks and fording rivers, as though we had been born elves instead of flesh and blood creatures. A Chinaman was laying the table for supper, with the gliding aid of the Madonna. While she was thus engaged, I had time to examine the room, which was a singular admixture of rustic simplicity and modern refinement. It was a large chamber opening on the veranda, and its walls running up to the full height of the house without the intervention of any ceiling. The massive rafters, illumined by the flickering flame, displayed some curiosities of natural history, such as hornets' nests, which, after remaining tenantless for several years, had again become inhabited by sundry enterprising yellow jackets. A few lichens had vigorously contrived to struggle through some crevice, and garland the antique roof, and part of the vine which wreathed the porch had found some tiny nook or crevice through which to twine its delicate tendrils. The walls were of the same rich yellow cedar as the outside, and were paneled with a deep claret-colored manzanito wood, and decorated with pictures, some fine engraving of the best masters, or an oil painting of a striking scene in the valley. On one side was a bookcase stocked with choice volumes of standard works, literary, scientific, ideal, and artistic. At the opposite side was an enormous chimney-place formed of 4 slabs of granite. The hearthstone, a great slab of the same stone, extended some 5 feet into the room. Great logs, 5 or 6 feet long, raised on antique irons, blazed and crackled, and sent forked flames high up the capacious chimney. It was a treat to see that fire burn. It seemed so thoroughly in earnest to enjoy and lavish itself in such a luxurious splendor. It roared, and sparkled, and leaped for gladness. The light white ash fell so soft and tenderly around, like some cozy old grandmother hemming in her unruly, frolicsome children. The furniture was principally rustic, a broad divan covered with handsome skins, the easy chair before mentioned, made of the gnarled branches of manzanita, and lined with white woolly skins, an etage filled with wonderful fossils and crystals, specimens of gold and silver quartz, feldspar, and stalactites. A magnificent eagle, the defunct veteran of Eagle Point, spread his giant wings in one corner of the room, and a comical old cinnamon bear, with very red glass eyes, sat upon his haunches in another. His paws and snout served for a coat and hat rack. In a deep frame, covered with glass, was a dried bouquet of the wild flowers of the valley. It was easy to see the feminine hand which had been here. There were rustic tables, and an escritoire decorated with pine cones, acorns, and hickory nuts, and yellow pine bark, resembling the most elaborate oak carving. There were delicate baskets, suspended from the roof, of gray and yellow fungi, and containing great flourishing bunches of the woodwerlias, forming a living Prince of Wales's feather. Each window was a separate conservatory, where grew the singular blood plant, so called from its stem, leaves, and flowers being all of a flesh and blood color. A bobolink and grosbeak rivaled each other in an opposition duet. A guitar and a few scraps of manuscript might have told more for the talent than the tidiness of the author. Such was the general coup d'oeil which riveted my attention. With the gliding aid of the Madonna, an excellent supper of cold venison pie, smoking hot new potatoes, and green peas, was soon on the table, to which, after the entrance of Kenmure and Oswald Naughton, with the rosebud perched aloft on his shoulder, I addressed myself in real earnest, believing meanwhile that I had actually penetrated into fairyland, or, more vulgarly speaking, fallen into clover. Kenmure and the Madonna entered into a most intricate botanical discussion, the former all vigor, and arguing in little puffs and dashes, while the latter glided out her sentences like soft falling snow. I explained to my host the reason of my sudden advent, and the joke I had played upon the professor, which he applauded, and praised my courage in pioneering my own way. He expatiated, with great fluency and perfect knowledge of his subject, on the marvels, geological, botanical, and natural, of the valley. You need not tell me of the flowers, if these two have bloomed here, I said, indicating the rosebud and sprite. Yes, he said, these are the daughters of Awanee. They were born in the valley, and have never been outside its granite fastnesses. I thought, I remarked, that my guide had called the valley Yosemite. Yes, replied my host, that is the name which custom has now sanctioned. It means great grizzly bear, and the name arose from a celebrated Indian chief having killed one with a club, a wonderful feat in this valley. Editor's note: for the correct origin of the words Yosemite and Awanee, see origin of the word Yosemite, da. But the original Indian name previous to that was Awanee. We have called the children after the most profuse flowers here, the manzanita, and rose, Xanada, and Rosalind. But Rosalind is such a contented, happy little creature that cozy seems the most appropriate appellation. As I looked upon this artistic group, lit up by the varying flame of the pitch pine fire, I could not help believing that this family, shut in from the outer world, yet, with all the refinement of civilization, was surely one of the natural wonders of the valley. In spite of the adventures of the day, we still sat up round the fire until late in the night. The conversation was sparkling, and certainly original, and it was difficult to believe that I was a stranger amongst them, and had not been with them all my life. The little chubby Rosebud lay asleep in her mother's lap, and the elf, with unwinking eyes, kept her post at my side, every now and then, sotto voce, hazarding a plan for a new expedition. Kenmure's laugh rang clear up to the rafters as he promised to induct me into the mysteries of the saw-mill on the morrow. But once under the snowy sheets, I slept the sleep of the just, dreamless, and without waking, until the sun shone bright through my vine-latticed window next morning. Zenita, A Tale of the Yosemite, 1872, by Therese Yelverton. Separator, Chapter 4, A Day's Pleasure. Where was I? Was it all a midsummer night's dream? The question was answered by a little sharp voice snapping out, "Don't you want to come and bathe? The river is just deep enough to drown father in some places, but you can take your shoes and stockings off." And through my half-closed lids I saw my fairy of the previous evening, with a miniature frown still on her face, and a worried look, as though she had the cares of the world on her slender shoulders. "Hurry up," she said. "We have to catch the fish for breakfast. I can hook 5 or a dozen." Her conception of numbers was not very profound. "And if that is not enough, we can get them from the Indians. You need not be afraid of that Indian squatting on the rock with his bow drawn. He'll not shoot you unless you cross their trail. He's waiting for a Paiute to come. They've been at war. I'll take care of you. They always shoot with poisoned arrows. Do you know it? I'm not a bit afraid of them," she said, and the same uncanny light, which symbolized a smile, shot from her eyes, upon the most positive promise that I would prepare immediately if she would leave me. I succeeded in sending her forth to collect fishing tackle, and shortly after breakfast was announced by the sweet voice of Madonna, looking through my trellis work of vine leaves. My eyes wandered up what appeared a mile of perpendicular rock, without ever meeting the sky. The morning sun was bringing out upon it the softest gray tint streaked with burnished silver. Here and there a tuft of spirea was clinging, by some occult process, to the smooth rock, and the feathery branches of the spruce and tamarack were defined against its glistening surface, as though they had been frescoed there. I could hear the booming of the great Yosemite Fall like a distant park of artillery. The breakfast did as much honor to the housekeeping as the supper of the previous evening. Fresh trout, poached eggs, fried ham, strawberries with the morning dew upon them, and delicious cream and butter, made a meal for a sybarite. Then arose the different proposals for the day's entertainment. Mr. Naughton offered to saddle my horse and convey me to a near view of the magnificent double waterfalls, the Paiwayak and the Yowiyi, which I had seen in the distance the day before. Kenmure was full of some aeronaut scheme to the clouds somewhere between Tisayak and the moon. Mrs. Naughton insinuated that as I must feel fatigued after my long journey, we had better meander round the pleasant meadows and curves of the river, and watch the trout if we could not catch them. Miss Anita was eagerly bent upon a bear hunt herself, to be armed with a double-barreled rifle. Cozy prattled off that portion of each proposal that her coral lips could turn the easiest, and lisped out, "Saddle horse, Phissis, Big Bear, and Sifle," at which her great blue eyes sparkled with rapture, and she clapped her little dimpled hands, and laughed like the ripple of summer water. Amongst all these inviting tenders of amusement it was difficult to choose. Kenmure's celestial trip, as being the most impracticable, was the first to fall through. Xanada paced to and fro in the heat of her argument in favor of the bear hunt, urging how easy it was to kill the bear before he could come upon us. Mr. Naughton's journey having been reckoned at 14 miles, there and back, besides a good deal of hard climbing, was voted too fatiguing for the second day's excursion, and the Madonna, like all quiet, soft-spoken women, gained her point. Zanita was pacified by the offer of the porter's place in bearing a long fishing rod and basket, and there tantalizingly, skimming from pool to pool in the limpid water, were scores of speckled trout, all singularly cognizant of the fact that our admiration for them was of that ardent nature that we longed to eat them. As Mrs. Naughton, whom we shall call by her given name of Plachita, glided gracefully on with one golden-haired child in her arms, and the other with its deep midnight gaze clinging to her dress, she seemed to me the model for the poet's lines. And dark against day's golden death she moved where Irutus wandereth. A sweeter woman ne'er drew breath than my son's wife Elizabeth. Very probably, replied Mr. Naughton, amused by the suggestion, and a humorous twinkle came in his bright eyes, with the slight difference that she is my wife, not my son's. This matter of relationship having been settled, we set forth upon one of those delightful strolls which must live in the twilight remembrance of every one, unless a Cockney or a Parisian, who have never been outside of their capital, who are so satisfied to see their peas ready shelled, and their chickens ready trussed, that they are contented to believe they actually grew that way. A pious London cook once remarked to her mistress, as she was about placing a large turkey to the fire, "Ain't this a blessing of Providence, ma'am? for this here skiver to grow right in the middle of this fine fat turkey. Why, without that I never could get him all roasted. She had never seen a live turkey in her life, though she had roasted 500. But outside the Cockney and Parisian world, every man, woman, and child ought to remember a holiday in the country, when they gathered wild flowers for their sweethearts, and wild berries for their children. Who has not felt as if translated into a new state of being, to a higher existence, when suddenly transported from the noise and turmoil and worry of a city, the incessant clang of machinery, or the monotonous roll of street cars, to some peaceful Arcadia? And then what ecstasy to breathe in the stillness of the country, to listen only to those ethereal tones which may be the whispering of beatified spirits around us, or the tread of angels. There is a music in the hushed calm which speaks to the soul with an intensity of vibration, unaroused by the most stirring scenes of city life, awakening emotions too deep and spiritualized to be interpreted to the outer world, and which, though never appearing in garish day, dwell ever in the chiaroscuro of that dreaming spirit within us, to whom we all bow down in reverence. And on such days as these we commune with this mystic indweller of our interior life as with our guardian angel, and sweet and holy is the converse. We walked upon a carpet of greenest sward, besprinkled with blossoms of nature's brightest dye. Many of the valley flowers were as yet unknown to botanists, and it was amusing to hear Kenmure disputing with himself as to what genus they appertained. Now you would never believe, madam, that this tiny fellow belonged to the family of the composite, and yet you perceive, oh, I am credulous to any extent, I interrupted, and am prepared to believe any proposition you may lay before me today. I feel in too placid a state of mind to dispute on any topic, but when we get the professor here, he will fight you tooth and nail as to the origin of everything. There never was such a man for doubting. He is not satisfied yet whether he is dreaming a life, or living a dream. You will find him delightful company. I am sure I shall, replied Kenmure. I hope, said Mr. Naunton, that he will give us some satisfactory theory about the formation of the valley. Oh, I can tell you his opinion about that. He believes it was the bed of a great river from which the bottom fell out in the wreck of creation. The water subsided to the present level, and gradually dried off to this little river, vegetation taking its place everywhere. Good gracious, exclaimed Kenmure, there never was a wreck of creation. As though the Lord did not know how to navigate, no bottom he made ever fell out by accident. These learned men pretend to talk of a catastrophe happening to the Lord's works, as though it were some poor trumpery machine of their own invention. As it is, it was meant to be. Why, I can show the professor where the mighty cavity has been grooved and wrought out for millions of years. A day and eternity are as one in his mighty workshop. I can take you where you can see for yourself how the glaciers have labored, and cut and carved, and elaborated, until they have wrought out this royal road. Here Placida come to the rescue with a delicate perception, that I might feel hurt by this wholesale destruction of my husband's theory. Do you notice the peculiar spring of the branches out of the cedar? Unlike other trees, they appear as though a hole had been made in the main trunk, and the bough fitted in like the socket of a Dutch doll's arm. Yes, I replied, and also how singular is the horizontal growth of the limbs, while the main body is so perpendicular. Some of these trees are little short of 3,000 years old, said Mr. Naunton, and if we understood the low murmuring of their branches, they could doubtless explain many a mystery we now puzzle our brains over. They tell it to the birds, put in Xanada, and the birds will tell it to me. I know what the birds say. Miwa, our Indian, teaches me. Well, what is that bird saying now? That bright little fellow, I said, pointing, with a top knot of blue plumes. Her eyebrows contracted as she looked earnestly at him, and I thought for a moment the little sorceress was at fault. I was mistaken. He says, she interpreted, yonder is a strawberry patch with fine ripe strawberries. Don't you hear him? It's real plain. The same dark twinkle shot from her eyes. She knew well she had triumphed. We all laughed, and asked to be escorted to the patch of fresh fruit whose fragrant bed she needed no bird to help her to find. In fact, there was scarcely a spot high or low that those venturesome little feet had not explored. The valley was some 8 miles long, and about 1.5 miles in width, enclosed by immense bulwarks of granite, always precipitous, and sometimes ascending vertically 1 mile in height, occasionally advancing into the greensward in a stupendous colonnade, or massive single tower, sometimes receding into a cavernous amphitheater, like the interior quadrangle of some ancient chateau fort, simulating the domes of cathedrals, and minarets of mosques, and Chinese pagodas. Both ends of the valley were closed by a canon, or deep ravine. On the one end the river entered from the top. It came with a leap from the cloud's rest, the highest point seen from the valley, and dashed down in 2 falls, and a series of cataracts into the plain below, where it meandered round white sandy banks, the most tranquil and peace-loving little river in the world, shimmering coyly as for the sole benefit and habitation of the speckled trout jumping in its limpid waters. At the other end it stole quietly out through a rugged fastness, and was lost sight of in the deep canon. Upon whichever side we gazed, these towering battlements met the skies, their jagged summits cutting the horizon in clear pointed slants and zigzags, carved it into the curious form of a dandelion leaf. The blue vault above was the exact size and shape of the green valley below. So much of earth and heaven was encompassed by the granite walls, and all the rest of the great world was excluded. No sound but of nature's broke the stillness, and yet one might fancy there were a number of carpenters at work, I said, as we paused to listen to the rap-a-tap-tap of the woodpecker. There he goes, said my host. You can see him at work with his long chisel beak and scarlet hammerhead, working away faster than you can count the evolutions. He has bored a hole in that tree as rapidly as a joiner with his auger, and he has made it the exact size to fit in his acorn. I can show you trees perforated with 1,000 holes as close as a honeycomb. For these little birds have not only to provide their own winter food, but are fully conscious of the fact that the squirrels will rob them of the greater portion of their stores. And so it is in human nature, continued Mr. Naunton. 1/2 the world labors from dawn to dewy eve, and often by midnight oil, that the other half may prey upon them, and despoil them of the fruits of their labor. It is a common saying, that 1/2 the world does not know how the other half lives. But it is a problem easily solved. They live upon the said other half, as do the squirrels on the woodpeckers. Take the father of a family. For years he has passed 6 days of every 7 sitting on that hard stool in that dismal counting house, and has induced 5 or 6 young men, upon the alternative of keeping their spirit within their body, to do likewise, for the sole end and object that his lady wife and elegant daughters may sweep the street with their silks and velvets. He takes a hurried meal at a chop house on weekdays, and a cold slice on Sundays, in order that the servants may get out the sooner. Upon that day of rest he leaves his hard stool, and perambulates to church, and during the service has a quiet time to himself, to arrange for the coming week, and speculate how he can best utilize his time by making a review of the past, and prudential resolves for the future. Yet he is an independent merchant, with a heavy account at his banker's. There is no difficulty in discerning that he is the woodpecker, and his lady wife and daughters are the squirrels. There is the man of enterprise, fashionably dressed, with the weightiest diamonds in his shirt front, his buggy, or saddle horse, awaiting his pleasure. He has started every sort of company that a high-sounding name could be tacked to. He is a great talker, with an immense flow of language, and delights in the display of it. He has talked everyone's money out of their pockets to supply his need. He never did 1 hour's labor, mentally or physically, but has lived all his life in affluence on his neighbor's acorns. Sometimes it falls pretty hard on the woodpeckers. Some ravenous squirrels will not only help themselves to the superfluities laid by, but eat up the hard-earned share of the laborer. Look into that wretched garret, where dwells a mother, a son, and 2 daughters. The son, with his hands in his pockets, is loafing round the corner of the street, waiting for acorns to turn up without the seeking. The mother is trimming her pretty taper nails, and explaining to her daughters how she always kept them unsplit, and of perfect filbert shape. The elder daughter is arranging dead men's beards into pads in her hair, to give her head the proportions of an idiot's. But the second daughter, who is the woodpecker of the family, is stitching away at the bodice of a dress. Others lying about half completed. Her nimble fingers, filbert nails all cut short, go as fast as the head of the little woodpecker boring his holes, to complete those seams, and bring home the acorns, upon which the rest of the family live idly. The share remaining for the woodpecker is infinitesimally small. Jane, how can you sit over those seams, and flounces day after day, and night after night? I am sure it would kill me. I would let the people wait, exclaims the sister. She may be quite sure in process of time it will kill Jane, and she will wait for her acorns. But they soon look out for another woodpecker, for people never change their natures, any more than the Ethiopian his skin. Whilst Mr. Naughton had been speaking, we had all gathered round the strawberry patch, and been fed by Xanada and Rosalind with the choicest morsels. But here the dulcet voice of Placida broke in with the suggestion that, if we were going to continue such disquisitions, we had better adjourn to a seat near the Yosemite Fall, where the roar, she added, naively, would serve for applause at the end of Oswald's speech. There is Anita like a tricksy squirrel, far away up the rocks already, I exclaimed. I hope she is not in search of that polecat she promised you, said her father, laughing, for it would be the most uncomfortable present I ever heard of.